storyteller in the family, and I wanted to know what kind of stories was she telling? What kind of storyteller was she?
Uh, Interesting that you remember the dedication to HCV, because at the time when I wrote Narcopolis, I had the hepatitis C virus, which at the time was incurable. And since it's been curable, and I've done the cure, but I dedicated it to HCV because I thought it was the awareness of mortality that made me write Narcopolis and finish it as quickly and as intensely as I did. And I think it had everything to do with knowing that time is limited and that there's no more time to waste, and you better get it done now if you're ever going to do it. So when I wrote Names of the Women, which was about two years ago, I wanted to dedicate it to the women in my life, including my grandmother, my mother, my sister, my niece, and say that this is a book for women and about women, and actually about women neglected in the Gospels. And I thought about my grandmother because the great thing about her was she was the one who told you the stories that were omitted by the rest of the family. And in my family, there's no question that it was always the women who told the stories. The men were strong, much too silent. In fact, not always even strong, let's say weak, silent types. And the women were the ones who spoke, who told the stories. So if you wanted to hear things about the world, you sat with the women. They were opinionated, much too opinionated. And they told you what the beauty of the stories my grandmother told was she told us all the stuff that my mother, my father, my uncles and aunts would leave out. So all the scandal, all the terrible things that people do in families, as we know, she told those stories. But never in a kind of a judgmental or apocalyptic way. It was always in a really kind of flat tone that had the sense of tragedy kind of inbuilt throughout.
And you as a child, you liked hearing the stories, because sometimes children are interested in the stories their grandmothers tell, and sometimes they just don't have time for it.
No, I was mesmerized. Yeah, once she started, I couldn't but listen, and I sat until she finished, because they really had, they were told not the way an amateur would tell a story. They were told with craft. So she would introduce an element at the beginning of it that had some kind of a hook that would get your attention. And then that hook would play itself out towards the middle or the end. So there was real craft involved there, And I think that was the thing that really kind of got my attention about those stories. And I'm always grateful, I think.
Yeah. And you've also said that she was the last member of your family who could recite from memory the hour-long service in Aramaic, Malayalam, and Sanskrit. Two things. One is that unusual for a woman to be able to do it? And the second is, did she understand Aramaic?
Thanks. Those are the important questions. She didn't understand Aramaic. She had memorized it from recitation, from what the priests would recite, and they knew an hour-and-a-half long service by heart. And that's why they were the priests, because it was not written down. So that's what gave them their power. And of course, there were no women in that power structure. And she memorized the verses, and she would, if for some reasons we couldn't, or if her family, the extended family, couldn't make it to church on a Sunday, she would do it at home. Everybody facing one way, everyone standing, and she would do this hour-long thing from memory, of which only a few words did everybody understand. And those would be the words in Malayalam or Sanskrit. The Aramaic, nobody understood. And a lot of it was sung, and which, of course, makes it easier to remember, because there's the melody, there's the rhythm. And I think, I mean, she would never have framed it in this way, that it was a way for a woman to take back control of something that was owned by men. But that, I think it is exactly what she did.
Do you remember any of it?
I remember phrases. I remember the word slow-mo. I remember the word barakimo, which means mercy. And these are words, I know words like that, and I know some phrases, and these are not phrases that you're going to hear in any kind of conversation, you know, in Kerala today. I think.
And did the priests ever discover that this woman actually knew their whole service by heart?
I think they might have, because they stopped being invited to the house. And the thing is, in Kerala, the priests are so powerful that they are invited to people's houses regularly, where they're fed and given gifts, you know. And they're all invariably, what's the word? In North India, they say healthy. Yeah.
In Bengal, we say shastovan, which means healthy too.
Yeah, which means rotund, let's say, you know, clearly eat 4 meals a day and, you know, don't kind of deny themselves. So, yeah, and it was, and, you know, basically they're the Orthodox priests. They dress in black. They have the, like Greek Orthodox priests. And I think it's possible to say that they reek of foreign perfume and corruption.
Sure, similar things. There should be a perfume named corruption, actually.
Isn't there?
There totally should be one.
Right. Calvin Klein.
Calvin Klein. But did you ever have conversations before writing this book with people in your family about the women in the gospel, and you know, the women who have cameo roles, women who get written out? Was that?
No, it never was. No, it really kind of. I was working on another novel, and I've read the Bible as a kind of a literary text from when I was a teenager, and used it for poetry very often, because I like the cadence and the language, and I've used that a lot. And I was looking through one leather-bound version of the King James Bible that had been handed down in the family, and just looked through the Gospels, and I was struck that, first of all 4 Gospels were written by men, and that when women appeared in these Gospels, they did these appearances that would last 1 stanza, 2 lines. They were not named, but the role they play in that story is something so pivotal to what happens in the story of the New Testament. And I couldn't help but think that that had everything to do with the fact that the people who told the stories and recorded the stories were men, and that perhaps they wanted to, as with the Orthodox priests in Kerala, they wanted to preserve what gave them the power in the community, you know. And so I thought, it kind of struck me as an idea that what if you were to retell that Testament, those Gospels, from the other point of view, and once that hit me, I gave up work on the novel I was working on and just started work on this, and it was the fastest thing I've done. It was about 9 months.
Right.
Yeah.
9 months, which is kind of significant for a novel that is based about women, a labor of love, literally. But, so there are, I think, 15 women that, so what, did you have a long list and a short list? Since we are at a Lit Fest, I thought I'd use Lit Fest speak.
I had a short list, I had a long list which was pretty short
Okay.
because I knew that there were some characters you had to include. You could not exclude. But then as I got into it, I became very interested in the peripheral characters. The handmaidens, the servants, you know, the sisters of Christ who are not named.
I didn't know Christ had sisters.
2 sisters, yeah, half sisters.
Yeah.
Yeah, because no one's ever talked about them, you know. And yeah, so the wives of the men who feature in the story, and how would they have seen what, for example, the beheading of John the Baptist, how would they have seen that and felt about that? And so then it became a huge list, and I just narrowed it down to 15 because I wanted it to be a short novel, and I wanted it to be paced like a thriller.
And well, one of the things you just said reminded me that when I first started showing interest in writing and things like that as a teenager, I remember my parents actually gave me the Bible as a birthday gift to read as a literary text. I mean, I went to a Jesuit school, but because we were not Christian, we didn't have to go to catechism class. We studied moral science instead. I don't know. I think it would have done us more good to study the Bible, at least as a literary text.
And how were your Jesuit teachers?
So at that time, here in Kolkata, the Jesuits were still Jesuits not from your state, but there were more of them were still coming from Belgium and France. So there was a mixture of people from Kerala and stuff. And to be honest, I got my first lessons in writing from the Jesuit teachers because I would try and write to impress people with big words. And I remember Father Camille Boucher, who crossed, you know, I turned in this thing with lots of, feeling very smug, and he sends it back saying, use simple words. You don't need to use long words to tell the story.
Which is always good advice.
Which is always good. So when I wrote my first book, I put that in the dedication of the thing.
My first Jesuit teacher was Father David in Hong Kong, St. Joseph's in Hong Kong. And he was a figure of terror, really, because he taught with the aid mainly of a ruler. And whenever you saw him approach with a ruler, you know, you knew you were in for pain.
Oh, yeah, the Jesuits were big into that because even Father Boucher had a cane, and he would come and sort of lovingly caress the back of your neck with the cane, and then smack. And there was this whole thing of hair check, right? If your hair went below your collar, then there was an element of sadism too.
Absolutely.
Probably.
And of course there is, because you know they're Jesuit priests. They do it to themselves every day. They flagellate themselves. So they're also interested in flagellating the boys they teach. You know, I mean, so to speak, figuratively.
Well, sometimes not.
Sometimes
not figuratively either.
One of the crazy things he used to say was, this is a class full of British, Chinese, and Indian students. And there were maybe 3 Indian students. It's a school in Hong Kong. And he used to love to say, by the Lord Harry. Hurry. Hurry, you know. But he would deliberately mispronounce it as Harry. Yeah. It was a way of kind of poking at the Indians. You know, by the Lord Harry.
So did you feel that difference of growing up in the Syrian Christian church versus the Jesuit school when it came to the Bible?
I can't say I did. I mean, I didn't really attend the Syrian Christian church except when we went to Kerala for holidays, and which is something my grandmother would kind of insist on, you know, every Sunday. But when we lived elsewhere, my father was not observant at all, except he sent us to Jesuit schools. So I think I might owe more to the Jesuits than the Syrian Christians, for better or worse, probably worse.
Now, to get back to the book, so you have these 15 women that you have drawn out into this, and a lot of people in the reviews have said that, oh, this book is a departure from the previous books, and but I felt that in some ways, like if you think of Book of Chocolate Saints, which we had talked about at this festival as well, where you'd said that that was a time when you realized that all saints were not white, blue-eyed, that some saints were swarthy and dark-skinned and things. And in some sense, this book felt like a stepping-off point from that book.
Yeah, no, thanks for saying that. I think that's true. It was because Chocolate Saints was a way of looking at peripheral figures in theology and in social and cultural Indian history. So if you think of all the saints who have never really figured in a kind of a hierarchy of sainthood because of the color of their skin, of course you have to think about the women, saints who have been excluded, and wonder why it's so kind of loaded on one gender,
Now, when you come to the women, as you said, they didn't all have names, and some of them are just referred to as the widow, the one who gives 2 mites to Jesus. For you, as a writer, what felt more interesting or challenging when you had this nameless person whom you had to give a name and then totally flesh out, or the ones about whom we have a certain conception or misconception already, which you could tweak, like Mary Magdalene?
No, I think the excitement really was in the ones we don't know about, but who very clearly played a role. Because when you're writing about Mary of Magdalene or Mother Mary, we know
I always thought there's so few women in there, and they had too many Marys already.
A lot of Marys, yeah. Including one of the sisters of Lazarus, including one of the women who were finally in Golgotha. And then, of course, they had tried to differentiate by saying the older Mary and the younger Mary and so on. Yeah.
But no, go ahead. I interrupted you. In terms of creating the characters, the ones you didn't know about versus the ones we...
Yeah, so the ones that we knew about, I had to stay true to the biography. And I mean, that's not a limitation really, because you are kind of inhabiting the head, the mind, and that is the same whatever it might be. I mean, for example, writing historical fiction. If you're writing about, say, a famous historical figure, Lenin or Gandhi, you're still going to write in such a way that the biography really is just a stepping off point, and the rest of it is empathy and imagination and inhabiting that person's history. So I think there was some point where it stopped mattering whether it was a well-known character or not, and you just, once you're immersed, I think it becomes very fast. And I think those are the best days in the long and boring process of writing a novel.
So what did we know about Jesus's siblings or half-siblings? So the names that you have, Asya and Lydia, those are
that's
not
made
even
up.
That's made up.
Entirely.
So what do we actually know?
We know that he had brothers, and they have to have been half-brothers, because Joseph had Jesus when he was already an old man.
Right.
And these were kids from another marriage, clearly. And we know that one of them was named John, and one was named James, and we know that they didn't get along. Because in one of those crucial scenes when he's holding one of his kind of largest gatherings on a hilltop, and somebody comes up to him and says, your family is here, your mother is here, your brothers are here, he spurns them by saying, they're not my family, this is my family. And you have to wonder what might have happened to make that estrangement. And I think, it's the old story about prophets at home. Your biggest critics are your immediate family. So I think that might have had something to do with the way the characters of the brothers were written.
Which is actually one of the most fascinating parts of the book, because we've all, especially those of us who've gone to Jesuit school, we have this image of Jesus in our classroom on the cross. But this idea of what it must have been like for the family to have a brother who had this strange calling that nobody could understand, and that estrangement, and who says, my mother is not my mother, whoever knows the word of God is my family. And basically it boils down to the question, how do you deal with a brother like Jesus?
And the question of fame. Mm-hmm. Because when that kind of fame arrives into an unknown, obscure family, and especially with siblings, and especially when it's the youngest sibling, you know that it's going to create some kind of friction among the other members of the family. And fame at 2,000 years ago or today, that kind of fame, there's no difference. There's a thin line between fame and infame, and now in this age of media, we know exactly what it means to be famous one day and to be torn down the next.
I mean, this might sound facetious, but when you're talking about Jesus and that strained relationship with the family, I was thinking, this is kind of even the dialogue people have when I'm not comparing him to Jesus, but even with our prime minister, and when he goes to visit his mother and all of that, people expect that is this strange thing. You acknowledge the family, but then as a prophet figure on the mountain, you're not supposed to be close to them.
And you acknowledge the family and your place of birth as the place you've left behind on your road to glory.
Or salvation
or the opposite.
Or the opposite,
yeah.
Whichever you want to do. But when you were writing the parts that are in the voice of Jesus, did you always intend to write that part in the first person?
I did. In fact, that was one of the first things I knew about the book, that it was one of the first things I wrote, that those bits would be in the first person. And it would be Christ on the cross talking across his life and into the future. So where time doesn't really exist. In fact, I thought that those would be the passages that would engender some kind of criticism, because how dare you write
in the voice of,
how dare you write the Messiah in the first person? But so far it's been okay.
So nobody's threatened to.
Well, I'm not on Twitter, so who knows?
You're not on Twitter, or yeah. But at the same time, you have this line where Jesus is on the cross and he says, "You must allow the women to speak, because without them, my teaching would amount to nothing." And how much in your reading of the Testament did you get a sense of Jesus' position on women and his women followers versus what you wanted his position to be?
No, in fact, I absolutely picked up that idea from the way you see him talking about women, and talking about the poor, and talking about the marginalized, and talking about the outcasts, and the people, the prostitutes, the thieves, how inclusive he was when it came to those degraded, marginalized figures, and how much contempt he held for those who would be seen as sources of power and wealth and glory and, you know, kind of that contempt really that he never held for the poor, for the marginalized, for women. I think that tells us a lot about him. And, you know, the point is today, 2,000 years later, when we think about the church and the kind of damage the church has done to the actual theology of Christ, how much damage has been done by this possessive, selfish church that is interested in money and power. Think about the Vatican, for example. When we think about what the church has become compared to what Christ was, they are exact opposites. Christ was, yeah, thank you. He was a rebel, you know. He was against power, and he was against government, and he was against the people who decide the fates of other people. He was about love, you know, and the church is not about love.
Especially, I mean, you know, you're talking about the Vatican, but we also saw right here in Kerala what happened to the nuns who spoke out.
Absolutely, and it's still happening to those nuns. I mean, it's appalling. There's nothing Christ-like about that. That's the opposite of a Christian idea of humanity and justice, you know.
And you don't think the current Pope has nudged the church closer in any way to that original idea?
You know, when the current Pope became the Pope, I think there was a lot of hopeful expectation about him. But the thing is, the Pope is more than just a kind of figurehead for the Catholic Church. He also runs a vast business enterprise, right, you know, which has 1 million strings attached to it and 100 million areas that it cannot touch or overturn. And it's so clear when you actually think about the kind of things that the Pope says these days, you know. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's a point where you feel relieved that you have someone who says somewhat more palliative and balm-like things, even if necessarily the actions don't always match the words.
And even if those words aren't entirely believable.
So you have this line there, they will build the church on the witness of the women, but they will refuse to record their names, which, you know, which is in fact a kind of the original sin of what happened. And it's a hypothetical what-if question, and there's not really an answer. But while writing this, it will make you think, how would the church have been different if in fact it had recorded the names of the women as it built it on the witness of women?
Well, exactly. And the point is, you have to think about the church like a country, like a nation, like a republic. And you have to think of the nations that are run by women, right? Mm-hmm. In Europe, for example, really, in New Zealand, for example, really nations that are beacons of hope and efficiency, you know, and really you think this is the way it should be done, you know. So if the original church had allowed women into that power structure, had made them leaders of the church right from the beginning, I think it might have been a far wiser, kinder institution today.
You use the word kind, and one of the lines that did strike me very much in the book was you describe it as a world of plagues and disease, of war and bloodlust, of adultery and idolatry and cruelty, and say he had forgotten to create tenderness. And I want to ask you, where do you think you have found tenderness?
Okay, you just asked me a question that I'm not going to be able to answer because yeah, it's a daily quest, and I don't think it's ever going to be, you know, you find it in fleeting moments, really, with family, with invented family, with the family you create as you go through life. And then, of course, life infiltrates, and this deal that we were given with the Maker, where you're born, you're young, you're healthy, you're beautiful, and then you age, and you get decrepit, and everybody you know dies one by one, and you understand about mortality and about what a terrible deal it is that you were given to be born, to be young and beautiful and healthy, and then continue on this course of a few decades within which everything falls apart. Everybody you know dies, and the world as you know it ends. So, I mean, that is the deal that we're offered, and I think if we were offered that deal before we were born, I don't know if I would take it, actually. I think I might say, no, I'm going to pass on this. I'll see you next time around. You know, so tenderness, really, that's all we have, you know. Thanks for tripping me up there, Sandip.
There's actually, Jeet has a treat for you in store, and I think this might be a little moment to, we've been talking about this book, but Jeet promised to give us a glimpse of something he's working on, so something that nobody has read yet of his new poetry. So before we move to questions, Jeet.
Yeah, I'm just going to read a couple of poems from a book I'm working on, and very grateful to be in a non-BJP state while I read these poems. This is called A Kind of Anthem. A nation you thought you knew, from Ashoka to Buddha to Gandhi to Nehru, in a single decade unravels into Muslim, Christian, Hindu. Unholy trinity of saffron, green, and blue on a field of British white. My girlfriend's Chinese, my baby mama's a Jew, my husband's red, white, and blue. When we're out on the toot in Chikmagalur, Diu, and Kathmandu, there's no jealousy or rue. We try to eat right. We like our new brew. We float past our differences and accrue credit for the next bardo, our karmic due. Either way, it's true. We're dead if we don't, and dead if we do. Got a light? This is the ghost of Mr. Great Soul. Why, if it isn't Gandhi, returned as a house gecko, talkative, still slender, motionless on the wainscoting. His chirp is plummy British banter. Dear boy, have a deco. An eye for an eye makes the whole world blind, or so you'll find. Mind, one hopes not. And so on and so forth. All I say to him is, what? I don't mean to be rude, but you left us no food. The carving knife you used, like some tiny god, still drips blood on the old floorboard. My extended, hopeless family sat down for dinner in India and got up in Pakistan. You turned our house into a granary the army used for bribes to win over the strongest tribes. 75 is 70 years. Give or take 5 years. You expect things to change, but what has? Well, we pray to screens, and they're still at it, your assassins, in the name of love and fame. A people divided by circumcision or not, veils or not, meat or not. You expect things to change the same. Mr. Gecko, Mr. Forget-Me-Not, Mr. Great Soul, you're here and you're not. Two more. This is a ghazal called December 2020. 2020 is acuity of vision, a bane of the plague. It's the year we saw clearly the claim of the plague. The poor and the powerless were first to be forgotten and last. How else do you play the game of the plague? The corrupt and the cockroaches always will survive. Home ministers too. Oh, shame on thee, plague. Mandelstam's joke about Stalin's roach mustache got him sent to the Gulag, a stain on the plague. Ferreira, Gadling, Dawale, Gonzalez, Rout, hounded, imprisoned, driven insane in the plague. Kalita, Narwal, Teltumbre, Wilson, Rao, Bharadwaj, Babu, Sen, Navlaka, say each name to the plague. Where did conscience go in India's new Gulag? To the alley to sell itself for fame in the plague. Say nothing, hunker down, mask up, stay safe. No Jeet here, just your share of blame in the plague. And I'm going to end with February 2020. The climate's in crisis. To breathe is to ache in India. Too cold or too hot, we freeze and bake in India. They police our thoughts, our posts, our clothes, our food. The news and the government is fake in India. Beat the students bloody, then file a case against them. Criminals in power know the laws to break in India. Pick up the innocent and lynch them on a whim. Minorities will be taught how to partake in India. Hum dekhenge, the poet Faiz once said, but if you say it, you're anti-national. You have no stake in India. Women and students and poets, they are the enemy. Come here, dear. We'll show you how to shake in India. The economy's bust, jobs are few, the poor are poorer. Question is, how much more can we take in India? When you say your prayers, make sure you pick the right God. Petitions to the wrong one you must forsake in India. Jeet, if you don't like it here, Pakistan isn't far away. If you want to stay, shut up. Learn to make in India. Thank you very much.
And you will launch this where in India? Here, maybe, right? Kolkata.
I think it might be a safe place.
This might be. Tell us, when is this book coming out? The book.
I hope to finish it by December, and I'll deliver it then.
And you heard it first at the Kolkata Literary Meet.
Thanks so much. Thank you for not throwing your footwear at me.
So we have time for a couple of questions. So put your hand. Yes. I think your mic's.
I really feel that faith comes easier to women than men. But in Bible, I have always wondered that why faith which comes easier to female, they are so marginalized. So I see my mother, I see my sister, they are much more faith oriented than my father or uncle. But in Bible, just opposite happens. So this has been my childhood curiosity. What is happening in my house is just what is mentioned in the Bible.
Yeah, I think you're saying what's happening in your house is the opposite of what's in the Bible. That's because those descriptions or portraits in the Bible are not accurate. I don't think anything has changed in 2,000 years in terms of faith and in terms of humans and in terms of men and women. We're the same as we were 2,000 years ago. We just now have smartphones. That's pretty much, the only difference in terms of how technology kind of affects our emotions and our intellect and the way we interact with each other. But the basic human emotions, they haven't changed. And faith goes beyond gender. And I think in all communities, it's always the women who have held it together. So I think you're absolutely right. And the reason that we don't see that in the Bible is because it's a kind of a fiction. Those Gospels, the New Testaments, have as much fiction as they might have truth, So, yeah, I think that might be the correct kind of lens through which to view those stories.
Did your mother, speaking of following up on his question, did your mother and sister, because your grandmother is not there, but your mother and sister know this was a project you were embarking on? And did their views on it change when they read the end product?
My mother, when she heard that I was working on this, which was much towards the end of it, didn't like the idea at all. Because she's a conservative South Indian woman who has grown up in a very conservative patriarchal society that she kind of believes in a way. Although not entirely, because she has far more opinions than my father ever had. So at first she was very kind of unhappy with the idea, just because I think when Narcopolis was published, one of the things that really bothered her was the number of kind of curse words in that book. And, I think friends of hers told her about certain passages in the book. So she got very nervous when she heard.
Oh, what are you doing to the Bible now?
Yeah, now it's going to be the Bible.
Bible of curse words, the curse words.
Curse words in the Bible, and now what's going to happen to us kind of thing. But nothing's happened so far, so I think maybe things are okay.
Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
So, Jeet, you said that you'd imbibed a lot from your grandmother, who was the storyteller. And as a child, you were very influenced. Did she tell you any specific stories about the women in the Bible? Or was it generally about Christ and, the story of Christ? But did she specifically talk about the women? That's what I...
Thanks so much. No, no, she didn't. She retold the Bible stories very often, but even when she told us stories about, really, I mean, it's not right to call them stories. It was a kind of elevated form of gossip that could have been kind of structured into a novel. Really, that's what it was, and long stories invariably, which featured women, but when she told the stories of the Bible, the women were not elevated in any way. She kind of relayed the story, but she absolutely personalized the stories and made it seem something so dramatic, you know, and so compelling. And once she started, you just wanted her to get to the end of the story, even though you knew how it was going to end. I mean, we all know how that particular story ends. We know that it ends with a man crucified on a hill and allowed to die over 2 days, 2 or 3 days. We know that's the ending of the story. But even then, every time I heard it or heard excerpts from it, it was with the excitement and the suspense of hearing it for the first time. And I think that really is the skill of the storyteller as much as the components of the story.
And as you write, I mean, the man is crucified and put in the cave, but the men, they did not see him laid in the cave, and it was not they who returned to find him gone. It was the women, only the women. Any other questions before we have time for probably one more? Well, I'm going to then. I'll jump. Oh, okay. You get double dipping. Your mic's not working yet.
Hello.
Yeah.
They say that whatever we study here during our childhood, it gets imbibed to us. So you are brought up in a very Christian theological society, religious place. So this writing against so-called religion, did you have a kind of moral crisis that I'm going against the whole thing that I have been hearing, knowing, listening, reading from childhood?
Not at all, no. I mean, I was brought up in a Syrian Christian family, but my parents, my father was not observant. He didn't go to church. He was kind of against the idea of going to church, although he insisted that we go to church whenever possible. And I think my mother was more felt more responsibility about the religious aspects of our upbringing. But I never felt any pressure to be Christian, for example. My father, in fact, is far more conversant and knowledgeable about the Hindu scriptures than he is about Christian scripture. He knows the Hindu scriptures very thoroughly. And whenever if I'm working on a book and I need a question answered, I go to him. He knows everything about that aspect of Hinduism and Hindu culture, really, especially social culture. And in fact, he's never written about Christianity. You know, so I never felt that kind of family pressure to conform to Syrian Christianity. And I think when my father learned about the project of this book, that it's a kind of an alternate take on the Bible, that it's a retelling of the Bible in a very unorthodox and even kind of radical way, he was pleased with the idea. He liked it. You know, so, yeah.
Any other last questions? Jeet, when you were writing this book, though, this was before the pandemic, right? Is that when you were writing it? So did it strike you, you know, when you're talking, all this conversation we've had about bringing the people in the margins to the center, Christ as a migrant figure, and all of that, like having written this book and then the pandemic happens and suddenly people start talking about migrants, what did that feel like?
Yeah, that was really strange because I think there's a moment in this book where Christ, his father, and his mother are seen as migrants going from one place to another looking for shelter. And we forget that they were a family of migrants, unwelcome in so many places. And that when Christ was born, he was born in a stable in Bethlehem, really in a foreign place where they were seen as foreigners. And at that time, the lands that are described to us in the Bible were as unforgiving and intolerant of foreigners as many of the places we know today. I mean, the migrant was as much a figure of suspicion as he is today. So, yeah, that was kind of, I don't want to say prophetic, but kind of strange.
Because, even here when we had the Durga Puja that year, one of the images that everybody talked about was a particular area where they did it, where they had the image of Durga, but it was a migrant family named Durga carrying her children in the same way, and that caused quite a stir that year.
What kind of stir?
Well, it went both ways. I mean, a lot of people really appreciated the idea that it was a reminder that the mother goddess in this time of COVID is standing in for the migrants. And in a way, it goes back to that original idea we had that we were talking about, that it is really about what is faith, what is religion, what is this worship, if you do not find it in your heart to show kindness to the most unfortunate among you.
Which really is, I think that is the one common thread in the thought behind most religions. And when a religion is used to twist that idea and make the outcast, the marginal, the unfortunate a figure of contempt or suspicion, you know that there's something very wrong with the way that idea has disseminated into society. For example, Christianity in the United States today, the right-wing Christian in the US today is as intolerant, really, as any right-wing figure in our society, and in so many unkind ways, really. And that goes against everything that you would expect a Christian to stand for.
Which leads you to the obvious question, do you think that despite everything we've gone through in these 2 years, the suffering that we have seen, we're still so far away, or are we a little kinder now, do you feel? Do you feel this idea of, how can you feast when your brother fasts? How can you laugh when your brother's house is in mourning and your mother tears herself from brokenheartedness? Have we learned anything in these 2 years?
No.
That's a short answer, and I don't think I have any follow-up question to that. So I thank you all for coming and spending this evening with us, and thank you, Jeet. You'll get an opportunity to see another side of Jeet tomorrow when he performs with his band.
Thanks so much. Thanks for coming, everyone.
Thank you so much, Jeet. Thank you, Shandip. As Shandip mentioned, Jeet's band will be performing tomorrow at Skinny Mo's at 7:30. So if you're interested, you can ask us for passes outside at the bookstore. We'll arrange them for you. Thank you so much. We have an online panelist joining us for a hybrid session in this